This is the Clutch Picks Betting Podcast presented by ClutchPoints, powered by DraftKings. Like, follow, and subscribe. Rate us, review us, all that other fun stuff. Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. Make sure you're following along on all of those platforms. That's how you support the movement. That is, once again, the Clutch Picks Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined by Matt Russell, sports betting professional and creator of The Window, available on Substack and wherever you get your podcast. Mr. Matt Russell, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday morning?
You know what the big victory is, Shell? The big victory after Thanksgiving week of football, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not sick.
That's good. That's good.
I haven't obtained some sort of right. Yeah, we got to take some dubs out here. I don't know how many times we've come out of that week, and I joined you on the podcast like the following Wednesday, and I'm just like beaten. I've just got nothing left to give. I don't want to say that I feel great by any stretch of the imagination, but like, it's not some super grim scenario where I'm just struggling along. I did manage to take a breath on Monday because college football season, regular season's over. So it's like you feel like you kind of accomplished something there. And then you like not literally wake up, but just sort of like kind of get out of that couple hour break and go, all right, still like a lot to go here for December. So if anybody, who bets both college and pro football is worried that we might not have as much to bet on, my friends, do not worry. We are still full bore right through into January. So I'm fired up about it, man. Like week 14, the schedule this week is an absolute banger. By my count, 7 of the 14 games are legit, to borrow a YouTube series, hot ones. From the standings perspective, right? Because every team is basically the same. We'll talk about this in a second. You can have more games that matter because if everybody's just kind of all right, as the case may be here in the NFL this season, a lot more games are going to be real headliners here. Which again, if you have 7 headliners, do you have any? I would say you do. You have 7 of them.
Yeah, lots going on for sure in the NFL this week, which means there's lots for us to break down on the pod as well. For those who might be new to the show, I'm going to give you a pick to each and every game on the NFL schedule, and then Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line was, where it is, where it could be heading into kickoff. And I come out on the other end with a much more informed pick, or at least that's the plan. That's what I try to do here. I play the role of the viewer, and sometimes Matt convinced me to change my pick, and other times I foolishly don't listen. Wow. Or talk, apparently. But that's a joke. That's a show. That's the bit. The goal, as I always say, is to win more than I lose. And last week, we're at a 7-8-1 week. Jeez.
Okay.
What is happening here? 97, 93-4 overall on the season, as just continuing to try to stack wins here and be on top by the end of the season, get to a good place by the time we're in the playoffs and just hit winners, because that's always the goal. Week 14, our buys include the Patriots, Giants, Niners, and Panthers. Those are your buys, kids. And as always, this means we begin week 14 on Thursday night with the Dallas Cowboys, who are taking on the Detroit Lions. Lions favored by 3 points at home. And both of these teams obviously played last Thursday. Lions lost at home to the Packers. Cowboys won at home versus the Chiefs. Mr. St. Brown being out. Amon-Ra St. Brown being out was a massive loss for the Lions. A couple tough 4th down plays for them as well. Slow start really kind of did them in. On the flip side, Dak just flat out out-dueled Mahomes and company. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, again, just can't be stopped. Spags had nothing for them. That was a thing that happened that I cannot believe that happened, but I watched it with my own eyes. Cowboys defense, Quentin Williams, beast, work. Season on the line for both of these teams, and in that scenario, normally, I like to take the team that I think is just better. But now I'm struggling with saying the Lions are just better. I don't know if that's the case. And if I'm getting 3 points with the Dallas Cowboys offense that just as I mentioned, can't be stopped. I mean, I got to take the +3 here with the Dallas Cowboys. I just feel like their offense just never seems to be out of it. It's tough to take. Whereas I'm just yelling at Jared Goff every week. Like, what are you doing? Or Dan Campbell. Hey, why don't you just give the ball to Gibbs? Like, I don't understand what's going on with the Lions at all. But I say all that to say Cowboys +3.
Yeah. So this is like, you're a big NBA guy, right? This is like an NBA Cup version of the NFL. Or at
Okay.
least it feels that way because these teams both played last Thursday, and while the Lions didn't win, the fact that they didn't win sort of made this game like the NBA Cup final here, right? Like there feels like there's more stakes mid-season than we ever kind of thought possible here because these two teams have not dipped in the case of Dallas, but in the case of Detroit for sure, have dipped out of the playoff picture, right? These are the two teams on the outside looking in, and what they're looking in at is your San Francisco 49ers at 9-4. And if one of these teams has to go to at least a sixth loss.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at it, like it's December, man, like you can't be 2 losses behind the 7th essentially placed team in the NFC. Now the Cowboys have actually maybe a better chance of catching Philadelphia than they do of San Francisco because San Francisco already got 9 wins and Philadelphia only has 8. And so my point is like if Detroit had won last week, then it wouldn't be sort of dire straits here. And Dallas winning 3 straight games has put them in the mix, right? So it's a bit of a 2 ships passing in the night thing. And so, we always talk about like market ratings and like, oh man, like as soon as the team hits like its high point from a market perspective, outside of its range, it's time to fade that team. And anytime we see maybe a good team kind of take a hit in their market rating, it's time to back that team. And that's what we're seeing here. Not rocket science here, right? Detroit has never been only a 3-point home favorite against the Dallas Cowboys if this game had been played in any other week this season. You'd probably even throw in last season, right? Particularly with the Cooper Rush era that we went through towards the end of last season with the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And so fundamentally, from a value perspective, you go, okay, like the downgrade here for the Lions and the upgrade here for the Cowboys, which are now in the 60s. We have hit 60 for the Cowboys. You remember not long ago, we were in the low 40s with the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, I remember.
We thought it was too low then because we're like, as long as Dak Prescott's playing, this team is at the very least average. Well, now the market has caught up and passed it and is now like full on like this team is good. This team is good. And the thing is, obviously we would normally be like, well, Detroit, -3 getting good value here. Obviously the Amon-Ra St. Brown situation is somewhat problematic. The only sort of case for Detroit around that is there are games where he doesn't do much and the Lions are still able to like get it figured out.
Yeah.
Most of the time that's because they're able to run the football. And of course, Jerry Jones, ever since trading Micah Parsons, has become obsessed with stopping the run, right? Where it's like, we're going to trade him for Kenny Clark, then we're going to get those draft picks. And then it turns out they're going to trade those draft picks, or at least, some of that draft equity that they have built up for Quinnen Williams so that they can stop the run. And that's worked for 3 games. And so now you're sitting there, if you're the Lions, and you're going like, what do we got left to do here? Meanwhile, the Lions defense, getting shredded by Jordan Love last Thursday, now has to deal with Dak and those guys. And so part of this season, instead of the overall picture of us sort of going, all right, value here, market ratings here, et cetera, part of this season has been, like you guys got to stop just assuming that the Chiefs, Bills, Lions, Ravens, all of the power teams, that essentially all the favorites to win the Super Bowl coming into the season are just assumed to be good again this year.
Yeah.
Even if it's difficult to pinpoint why some of these teams aren't as good as they have been. Though, to be honest with you, it isn't really all that difficult, right? With the Lions, different play callers, we can go through all these other teams, right?
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. We don't need to do the entire roster of the league. But so the point is like if the immediacy, the sort of short-term attitude for this season has needed to be, all these really quote unquote good teams coming into the season maybe aren't that good. When you see the Lions downgraded from, we had them as sort of high as even in the low 70s briefly, but mainly like kind of a mainstay in the high 60s, them being rated at 64. We've talked about this with other teams and a little bit with the Lions. Like, what have they done to deserve that rating, right? They keep disappointing at this high rating. And maybe they are just among a cluster of teams, which now includes the Cowboys, as a team that's right around that high 50s, low 60s. Like maybe they'll get into the playoffs. Oh, it'd be surprising if they didn't. Oh, it'd be surprising if they won the Super Bowl, right? There's a bunch of conference leaders here. And again, we'll talk about some of these other ones. But like there's a bunch of conference leaders here that haven't even cracked the 60 mark from a rating perspective, or just barely have. And so you go, well, if those teams, the Broncos, Patriots, Bears, et cetera, can barely crack 60, what's to say that the Lions need to be above 60 this whole time? Again, just using that sort of quantitative number to evaluate a team's sort of power rating. And so, you go, okay, like whether the kind of just rule is the rest of the season, fade some of these teams as long as they're being given the respect that they earned the last couple of years, but have largely squandered this season. And you have them without, kind of a key element to the offense. I think I'm there right there with you, man. There's no reason why Dallas can't go have Dak Prescott shred this defense and win yet another game here. Because again, we all hate giving Jerry Jones credit. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. Hate when he's having fun. Do not like it when he is pleased. But you have to admit when he's actually made a sort of correct move here to assess the problems and do whatever he can, even if that means sort of mortgaging the future with the draft picks and whatnot. And it's a great deal for the Jets and all that sort of thing. Jerry doesn't care. Jerry's trying to win right now because Jerry's only got so much time left. And so, yeah, man, like I can't really argue with you on this pick. I can't get you off this pick, and I wouldn't even necessarily try.
Yeah, no, I totally get you, totally with you there in this whole Dallas Cowboys thing. I mean, offense, and you tell me I can get points. Cool, let's do it. Thursday night record, hoping to keep the Thursday night record going swimmingly.
Yeah. 3-1 last week in the Thanksgiving area, so I think that counts. As
I wish I could say the same. But we'll move on from that.
Whoops.
Bears. We move on to Sunday's
Speaking
action.
of.
Yes, exactly. Bears at the Packers. Packers favored by 6.5 points. Huge win for both teams last week. The Packers, yes, both of these games I got wrong. Both of these teams won. Packers beat the Lions, the aforementioned Lions. Jordan Love balled out. The offense looked great. Micah Parsons and the defense looked pretty good. They made the plays when they needed to make the plays. The Bears, on the other hand, they showed out against the Eagles, and if I'm being frank here, they just continue to run the ball, pound the rock, dominate the line of scrimmage, which is difficult to do versus the Eagles. I got to be honest here. I was just wrong about the Bears.
Yeah.
Right? Like the whole thing was about, hey, are the Bears really good? I don't really think they're really good. I don't think they're on that level. They dominated the line of scrimmage against the Eagles. That shows me a lot. Here's what I'm going to say about the number one team right now in the NFC, the Chicago Bears. I'm getting 6.5 points here against a Packers team that all season long is one of those teams that you just mentioned. They're supposed to be the top team in the NFC, and they just haven't really shown as many of the highs as we've been anticipating in this matchup. And I know it's been rare to see Chicago go into Green Bay, with stakes on the line, right? Yeah. Over the last however many years. But I'm getting 6.5 points. I'm totally cool and taking the 6.5 points with the Bears here. Because if the Packers are going to just beat the Bears, I want to see it. I want to see you beat the Bears by a number. And then I'll tip my cap and be like, all right, Packers, here we are.
Yeah. And honestly, why is it so difficult to believe that the Bears could just be last year's version of the Vikings? Right? Yeah. Where it's just like, I mean, they didn't really play a lot of great teams, but like you also can only play and beat who is in front of you. And, you mentioned obviously like the nobody really believing in the Bears. Like that was a hot topic, right? On Thanksgiving for, I think, a lot of people, right? If you're talking football with people, there's a lot of, are the Patriots for real? Are the Bears for real? And unlike last week's scheduled game for the Patriots with the Giants, the Bears game, you're like, yeah, well, you know what? We're going to find out tomorrow, We're going to find out tomorrow if they are quote unquote for real. And again, everybody has their own definition of what for real actually is. But you made the correct sort of assessment going like, well, if you can do it in the trenches against a team, again, speaking of a team in the Eagles who did it against the Packers and dominated the Lions in the trenches, if you can do that to them, then we're talking here, right? When you can have
business,
multiple tailbacks running for 100 yards against you, and so like the Bears can do that against the Packers. And again, for those of us who are in pre-Micah Parsons trade on the Packers to win the division, this is that uncomfortable spot where you're sitting there going 6.5 point favorite, really could use a win here and just, kind of take back the sort of division lead, or at least the first kind of tiebreaker in a, potential division tie situation. Though the tie, speaking of, that the Packers have kind of takes away a lot of the tiebreaker element, right? Because it's going to be really hard to have a traditional tie when one team has that tie, that number in the tie column. So it kind of devalues the game in a little bit, but it also means that you need to flat out beat the Bears in the standings, and therefore you have to sort of catch them. So as much as I would, and honestly, I probably will still include the Bears in sort of a money line scenario.
Yeah.
It's going to kind of counteract how, some of these futures. And that brings its own sort of tricky conversation with regards to how to manage your betting in December with regards to what you need for futures and all of this prices. But the point of all of this is the price here on the Bears has not really gone up after beating the Eagles and doing so relatively decisively, because that's not really what the betting market does. And so they got a small upgrade. I think we talked about it last week, where the Bears were still rated, despite having, I think it was 8 wins before last week, they were still rated as an 8.5 win team, right? That sort of league average, 50 out of 100, 500 record type of a team, because everybody was like, all right, cool about all those wins, but you didn't do it against anybody that was impressive. It was impressive last week, and the market moved them up to 52 out of 100, right? So it's okay, you're slightly better than average, and it's no, this team is definitively better than average. And again, maybe not if they played sort of a quality schedule, they certainly wouldn't have the record that they have necessarily, but honestly, look around at the rest of the league, right? No team kind of does. And so you need a really good schedule to have a really good record in the 2025 season. And so just fundamentally, man, even if you put the Bears at talk mid 50s, high 50s, something like that a lot of teams will get sort of rated as, if you were told that they won in Philly, then you're getting some value here on the Packers. And obviously part of that is has to do with the fact that the Packers looked good against the Lions. But we just talked about the Lions, potential for a defense that maybe not up to snuff again this year, despite being quote unquote a little bit healthier. I'm watching that Lions Packers game, and again, talking with friends and stuff about the NFL and talking about that game, going, are we positive we're just watching two really good teams kind of go head to head here? Or is this just kind of some bad football that's translating to points and a couple of big plays, right? And that's the tough thing about kind of the eye test when it comes to deciphering these football teams. And so,
and
man,
the refs
no
were
problem.
on one in that game, which is a whole different story. I know.
It's every game in the NFL.
I know.
Jeez, good gracious. Do not get me started on that whole thing. We do 2 hours just on that. Airing of the grievances. Maybe we will around Festivus.
Right, something like that. This is a tough game overall, but give me the points here with the Chicago Bears. And I just think this one, Packers got to show me they can lay a big number here against a team that you're gonna have to win in the trenches against. And that's gonna be interesting to see if they can do that. As we keep it going, though, we move on to the Indianapolis Colts, who are in Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. Colts is a slight 1.5 favorite. And I'll be honest, last week I came on here talking about the Colts and how I was on the Colts. And then this is the beauty of doing the pod on a Wednesday. I think it might've been Friday or Saturday when that video came out of Daniel Jones on his broken foot practicing. And I went, hold on a second here. I'm not betting on that. That's not a thing that's happening. I'm sorry. Against that defense. Nah, we're not doing that. How is my guy playing on that? That makes no sense. But also, when you even if he's able to play, you're clearly hobbled, you're clearly limited in terms of what you're going to be able to do. And thus you become somewhat predictable on offense. And when your offense was already, fairly predictable where you want to run the ball, and now, you benefited from having Daniel Jones able to like sneak out and get away and scramble here and there. And now you can't really do that. That's a very, very tough spot. I'm not saying we know I don't like Jacksonville a lot. I'm on Jacksonville here just because like this Daniel Jones thing can't like, hey, maybe they get away with it this week, maybe next week, and it's still, but like long term, I don't know how this is possibly a thing. I'm on the Jags here. I don't obviously love it, but I got my guy hobbling on one foot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we need to make sure everybody knows we are not doctors. But yeah, like broken leg doesn't seem like an ideal circumstance. And they're like, yeah,
what
it's
is
on
it,
like
fractured fibia?
It's a fractured fibula.
I'm looking it up.
Right? It's fibula, right? It's lower leg. It's shin. Basically, your shin bone's connected to the knee bone, et cetera, et cetera.
That's not good.
It's not good for when one of your sort of sneaky traits is mobility. One of your what's the word I'm looking for here? Bugaboos. I don't, you know what I mean? Is like is turning the ball over, not being able to escape, fumbling, not being able to escape the pocket. Sort of creates more potential for that. I mean, let's call it a kryptonite potential situation here. That being said, right? It's just. I think this kind of comes down to more like, what do you think of the Jacksonville Jaguars? Because per our sort of rules and regulations, they have blown through the top side of their rating. And so this to me, again, like I says, referendum on the Jaguars. If you think the Jaguars are now a above average team, let's put it this way, they are rated higher than the Chicago Bears.
Ooh.
Right. And so, So if you go, like I think they are better than the Chicago Bears, because what have we seen? Right. What have we seen? Right. Like that, them being able to get to Justin Herbert a few weeks ago, right? Winning that game convincingly, winning despite Trevor Lawrence turning the ball over 4 times against the Cardinals, who are just, unbelievable at finding the ways to screw this up. And then, obviously last week, winning that game against the Tennessee Titans, who are absolutely, as you might say, doing the most in the most sarcastic way possible. And so I just kind of look at those 3 games and I go, man, like there's some pretty significant vulnerabilities to those 3 teams, whether it's, mental or physical. And to just automatically like bump the Jaguars up in a more aggressive way than the betting market's willing to bump the Bears up. I just kind of fundamentally disagree. And, you can use the look ahead line to, for next week to, apply to these market ratings, right? So you understand, okay, well, it isn't just this matchup. It's next week too, where Jacksonville's a 9.5 point favorite. And I don't even know if I need to put another team in here, because you're already squinting and shaking your head as to who could they possibly be a 9.5 point favorite against.
Gotta be like Tennessee.
And the answer is actually the Jets. And it's like, well, the
Jets.
and the Tyrod Taylor Jets are like functional, and of course, won last week. I have a couple of wins before that. As we talked about, right? We're a little more into that Ravens game than the final score from 2 weeks ago. And I go like, that's just, again, another indication. Again, we use those 2 data points to create and follow and track these market ratings to understand when the betting market in general is getting too high or too low on a team. And so I just look at the Jags and I go, I'm sorry, like, why did the Jags get away with no one having to say to them, like, who have you beat? Right? Why did they get off scot-free? And their market rating just gets to keep going up. I got a kick out of it on Monday night, where ESPN puts up the like chase for the number 1 seed graphic, and they literally put up Patriots. I guess it would have been
Broncos.
Broncos. Thank you. Yeah, of course I forget the Broncos. Like, who's winning the AFC West again? The Broncos, the Patriots, and the Colts. And it's like, the Jag, and then they show that like the standings graphic, and the Jags are actually the team in first place. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I just got a kick out of them being like, wow, we still think the Colts are the team that
Yeah.
is, more likely to kind of, take a run at the number one seed, or maybe they was just kind of being lazy. I don't know, but I guess just the idea that the Jags are in first place
Mhm.
now by tiebreaker in the AFC South
Mhm.
is alarming to me. So this line would have been higher the last couple of weeks, right? Whether that's
Okay.
kind of taking the Colts down because of some of the results over the last couple of weeks, right? Back-to-back losses to the Chiefs and of course to the Texans last week. Listen, the Texans got away with a few things last week, yeah, right?
They
Right, that
did.
helped them win that game. And so I don't know if the Colts were, going to quote unquote ever cover the number there. And again, you mentioned the Daniel Jones thing. Obviously, you saw the number drop. Right, it went
Mhm.
from -4.5 down to -3, basically on the idea of like we didn't really realize that Daniel Jones is just strutting around out there with a broken leg. I think in theory the idea is that can heal kind of over time, but like I don't know. Again, not a doctor. Breaking news, not a doctor.
Yeah.
Again, fundamentally, like the Colts rating has dropped and probably into a spot a little bit more befitting of them. To be honest with you, I'd even kind of knock it down a little bit more. But even more, to be honest with you, I still think the Jags are just kind of an average team, and I just can't get with the idea that they are all of a sudden, again, better than the Bears, better than the Joe Burrow Bengals, and then kind of getting, creeping upwards to the top of the AFC, even if the sort of standings kind of indicate that maybe that's fair. No, I just can't do it.
That's
Just
so
can't do it.
funny. Oh, I listen, I understand. I definitely understand what's going on here. I definitely get it. And I think it's one of those things where as I as I look back on this one, as I there we go. We wait for the sound effect there. Thank you, control room.
Oh, the switch. I didn't think we were gonna get the switch.
The switch occurs here. And one of the reasons for this, I will say, is just the mention of Trevor Lawrence, and I just have like bad flashbacks. Because he's become a
Yeah.
dude in the league that just does the most. And it's so strange when you think of how highly touted he was coming in. And then every year it's like we're making excuses for him about who's the head coach, who's a coordinator, who's this, who's that. And at some point, it just comes down to your individual decision making as an NFL QB.
For
And yeah,
sure.
so you know what? This was one that easy for you to get me to switch here. I'll switch over to the Colts here, -1.5 in this one, which is essentially coming down to a divisional game, right? We'll
Hmm.
we'll, we'll call it one of those, and we'll move on to another big divisional game here. And this one involves the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are in Baltimore to take on the Ravens. Ravens favored by 6 points. I don't know what Aaron Rodgers was doing trying to play football last week. I don't know what the Ravens were
No.
doing trying to play football last week. And I say that
Right.
for obviously different reasons.
Yeah,
The
for
Ravens kind
sure.
of look like they no showed at home to the Bengals and like they just enjoyed their Thanksgiving. I don't know what was going on with the Ravens, but it goes to your point earlier about, who we expect the Ravens to be versus who they actually are.
Yeah.
And you told me last week as we were talking about this pick, which we agreed on last week, taking the Bengals. But one
Hmm.
of the things you talked about was Lamar Jackson, and he's playing, but maybe he's not healthy or as
Yeah.
healthy as we need him to be. And last week was another just sign that, he's probably not that healthy. Hopefully, this little rest here will help him going from a Thursday to, get some little extra time here.
It's a great
Aaron
point.
Rodgers, meanwhile, surprise, surprise, didn't make it through the game. Who's stunned at that one? Mason Rudolph was back in action. And obviously, I don't mean to laugh at someone being injured, but I
I
feel
do.
like Aaron Rodgers kind of brings it on himself here.
Yep.
Like, what are we doing here? I'm gonna take the Ravens here just because I think I'm playing into what you said earlier about who I expect the Ravens to be versus the Steelers, who I still don't know what they're doing. Like even with Aaron Rodgers, even with
Sure.
Mason Rudolph, their like bar is just so low for me in terms of what I expect them to do. Whereas at least the Ravens, there's still a glimmer of hope that I have that they
Yeah.
might be able to figure some stuff out here. And so with that, I'm laying the 6 points, even though that's a lot, win by a number, but Steelers offense is showing me nothing. So
Why the NFL is just the best when it comes to betting it, obviously. is just the balance over the course of the season where you're going,
Yeah.
we just talked about the idea of like, you can't get married to these teams
Mhm.
because of an opinion that you had because of last season and a couple of seasons before, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, if you go into the season with an opinion, just because 5 games, 7 games go by
Mhm.
doesn't mean anything. I mean, think about how many games have been played in the NBA, things how many games have been played in the NHL, right? And like nothing's really changed. We do that same sort of market rating exercise over at the window for the NHL. And then,
Mhm.
we go through 20 games of the season and we start making adjustments to teams' market ratings. And like 8 of 32 teams need an adjustment,
Yeah.
which means 24 teams, like there has not been a change of opinion regardless of what the standings look like, right? It's
Yeah.
like the Ducks are leading the division, don't care, see, have the same opinion about them. The Oilers can't win a game to save their life, don't care, feel like they're going to turn it around, right?
Mhm.
But in the NFL, like 5 or 6 weeks go by and all of a sudden it's like, change your entire point of view on a team. Now again, I just said that we have to be malleable in some of these situations, and I'm saying all this to get around to the point of before the season. One of the things that we talked about was, as long as the vibes are high in Pittsburgh and the weather's warm and Aaron Rodgers is having a good time, the Steelers might be a viable bet,
Mhm.
right? Obviously, pricing matters and all of that sort of thing, but they might be a viable bet because the market is just assuming that the Steelers are going to be bad. And so then they start the season 4-1.
Mhm.
The vibes, it turns out, are high. They are 6-point favorites on the road against Cincinnati on a Thursday night. And
Yeah.
you and I come on here and go, that's too much.
Mhm.
That's too far. And we need to be taking the Bengals. At least, like, I don't remember what, you ended up with there, but that was generally the conversation. So,
Definitely was
uh,
not on the Steelers.
right. So since then, they are 2-5. Their 2 wins came at home against Indianapolis and at home against Cincinnati. Now, the Indianapolis one sort of um, stands out because it's obviously Indianapolis, a good team or whatever, right? But the
Mhm.
Steelers turned them over, 6 times in that game, 3 fumbles, 3 interceptions. And then the other win against the Bengals, which, from a scoreboard perspective, looks like it was a convincing win because it's 34-12. The reality is, in the second half, that is a 2-point game, or at least maybe it was the end of the second quarter. Point is, it was a 2-point game. The Bengals are driving, and then Joe Flacco throws the pick six. And then all of a sudden, now you've got a 2-score lead against Joe Flacco, and you can let the pass rush go to work. And so the problem is, when the pass rush can't go to work, there is nothing left on this team. And I'm not even talking about defensively. I'm talking defensively, offensively, the whole 9 yards, if you will. And they can't even get 9 yards on offense, right?
Mhm.
And so now, what would you say the vibes are like in Pittsburgh, right?
It's that shot of Aaron Rodgers walking off the field with blood coming down his face, and
Yeah,
he's just
or
pouting, and it's
any
like, yeah.
2-second GIF clip of him on the podium. Like, the vibes are incredibly low. They know that they don't have it. They know that they don't have a good offense. They don't have a good defense. They do not have it. And so, unless they happen kind of to run into a bunch of turnovers, it's jam done for this team. And so then you ask yourself, are they going to be able to turn the ball over against the Ravens? And so last week, you and
Mhm.
I, for the 6 years we've been doing this, one of our sort of sneaky underlying threads when it comes to the Ravens has been Lamar Jackson's ball security. Right? Where we're like, he's just so sloppy. And then the years when, and I'm saying years here, the
Yeah.
seasons when he's not sloppy, he just like wins MVP or
Yeah.
like just about does that. And so the Ravens last week, listen, I was on the Bengals, I was on the Bengals money line. I can admit that the script of that game for the first half, where Joe Burrow is looking a little rusty, particularly in the red zone by the goal line, they're having to take a bunch of field goals. Meanwhile, like Isaiah Likely is just running down the field, and then he's fumbling into the end zone, and Zay Flowers gets called for one of the sketchier offensive pass interference calls we've seen in a long time. And like all of a sudden, that's 14 points essentially off the board for the Ravens, right? That's
Mhm.
sort of the very least sort of a 13 or 14 point swing. And so I can acknowledge that that game probably goes a lot differently in the second half if you
Mhm.
just assign those 14 points to the Ravens. And now all of a sudden the Ravens are playing from ahead, etc. And so when I look at the Ravens, I go, can they do the thing that the Bills did last week? And the Bills really, and Tony Romo, for all his foibles, mentioned it over and over and over again, that on repeat, the Bills basically ran the same running play. and the Steelers couldn't do anything to stop it, right?
Yeah.
It was like a line it up, run to the left, cut back to the right, and just everybody just cleans out the backside. And Ray Davis, James Cook, and Josh Allen are just running with, abandon against the Steelers. We what we saw, and you mentioned it, right, with regards to Jackson and not running all that much. He did run a little bit in that
Mhm.
Cincinnati game, a little bit more and a little bit more effectively. There's a couple of decent sized runs. And you
Okay.
mentioned it's the best example, and we talked about it as part of the handicap last week, right? Lamar Jackson playing on a short week, not practicing on Wednesdays, and then all of a sudden he's going to now play on a Thursday on a short week, not being brought back until the Miami game because they knew that they would be playing 2 games in 4 or 5 days. And that wasn't going to be ideal for a return for Jackson because they know that he's not healthy even for 5 weeks ago when he came back.
Mhm.
But time was running out on the season and they needed to come back. And they're like, fine, we'll gamble. We'll play one more game here against the Bears without Jackson, with everybody else healthy. And they kind of just barely won that game. Scores a lot more more lopsided than it actually was. And now he gets that week and a half off. And he gets to see what the Steelers defense looks like when you just honestly run the ball with Derrick Henry, keep the ball yourself,
Mhm.
bring Keaton Mitchell in, run him a little bit. He can
Yeah.
be the Ray Davis in this circumstance. And then let the defense go against Rodgers, who, again, like, they still don't have any real sort of connection or chemistry with the best players on that team. And so, again, like, unless the Ravens turn the ball over, and they might,
Yeah. Yeah.
the Steelers have virtually no chance of winning this game. And so, because of the rivalry, and because of the Ravens losing that game last week, to, by the way, like, Joe bleeping Burrow, which, like, I guess no one's going to give Joe Burrow credit for being, like, I don't know how to define it, the biggest badass at quarterback in the NFL, like, from a straight up, like, I'll walk into anywhere and just try and,
We'll
like,
talk about him next.
this
I
yeah,
hear you.
it's like it's the only guy who's ever won at Arrowhead in the playoffs, basically, right? Like, what are we talking about here? So, again, like, I'm not going to downgrade the Ravens for kind of, running into that when a couple of fluky sort of things happened.
Mhm.
And so their rating right now, even as a 6-point favorite against the Steelers, is kind of in the low 60s, which is the low side of their range. It's not busted through, into the nether regions of when Lamar Jackson's not playing. Meanwhile, like, the Steelers at 45 out of 100 is the bottom side of their range. But,
Yeah.
like, if the expectation was come December, if the vibes aren't high and we're seeing a bunch of sort of, like, obvious red flags with this team, like, they're just kind of like a more high rent version of, like, the Raiders, where you're like, yeah, like, we didn't think it was going to be this bad, right? Whereas, like,
Mhm.
the Raiders might be the worst team in the NFL, and we've never really kind of given them quote unquote credit for that. I'm not saying the Steelers are the worst team in the NFL, but the Steelers are a pretty bad football team, and we just haven't given them credit for that because of the one thing that they're able to do every 3 or 4 games, which is turn another team over and then kind of be able to snowball that at home. Against the Ravens here, again, we've seen it in past seasons,
Mhm.
particularly towards the end of the year, where as much as the quote unquote rivalry, take the points no matter who's favored in this, blah, 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 blah. No, man, like, the Ravens are going to walk the Steelers in this game.
Okay. Okay. I like it. I like it. I like hearing that a lot. And we move on to the aforementioned Joe Burr. He's back.
Yes.
He's back. And back in a big way, as just mentioned, like, took a little while to get things kind of going there, but it was just beautiful sight to see Joe Burrow to Jamar
Yeah.
Chase again. I miss that. And
I could
now
have
you're
used it in
telling
the
me,
end zone. I could have used it in the end zone, Shell.
not being greedy.
Needed.
I'm not
I
being
needed the
greedy.
touchdown. There, I said it.
My fantasy team won by like 2 points. So listen, I'm not being greedy here.
Mm.
But now we're taking Joe Burrow and company into Buffalo to take on the Bills. Bills are 5.5-point favorites in this game. And I mean, I hate when things seem like super obvious because nothing's supposed to be super obvious in sports
Yeah,
betting, right? But, like, there's
sure.
no thoughts of me laying 5.5 points with the Bills here. Like, I don't get it. I don't really understand it. I think the Bills, they did their job last week. They got off to a slow start, picked it up in the second half, got things going, beat the Steelers. But we just talked about the Steelers. We just talked about their operation and what they got going on.
Yeah.
So we flip that around here. Aaron Rodgers and company got nothing in comparison to what Joe Burrow can do with these weapons through an air attack. So if this is going to be a shootout, this is going to be a high scoring game, give me all the points I can get. And if that's 5.5, I'm taking the 5.5 points.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like if I have to die on the hill of like Joe Burrow is awesome, then like I'm just gonna die on that hill, right? We
Yeah.
mentioned Burrow being like the only guy to basically win in Kansas City in the playoffs. Also did so in Buffalo at kind of, again, part of the peak of the Bills sort of run, right? Like that was an epic run. And it sucks because like every second year Burrow ends up getting hurt and you kind of forget how awesome he is. And then of course, like Cincinnati gets branded as like terrible defense, right? And like once you get that branding, you kind of can't shake it no matter like what you do. And I'm not saying they put him some great defensive performance against the
Yeah.
Ravens last week, right? But there's a handful of teams that were pretty bad, again, small sample size, 6, 7, 8 games. They were pretty
Cowboys.
bad right. And like some things are obvious, right? Where it's like Cowboys get 5 new players and you go, yeah, like 5 new players on defense, like that would be considerably helpful. Or like the Commanders, again, team we'll talk about here, right? Where like their head coach, a defensive, coordinator by trade goes, all right, I'm going to start calling the plays here. We're going to make some changes. And then all of a sudden, like their defense looks a lot better. And so, and then other times it's not quite as obvious. And again, I'm not expecting the Bengals to like shut the Bills out, but I also don't think one play is going to work over and over and over again. And the thing that obviously sort of fooled everyone, certainly myself last week, was just the fact that the Bills didn't have either of their offensive tackles and they were just kind of fine. And so when you talk about like, is this game going to be a shootout? That would then require probably Josh Allen to have to throw the ball and whether he's going to be able to get protection. Now, again, we'll have to find out, it's Wednesday, what that injury outlook is for those 2 offensive tackles. But again, I don't think you're going to be able to get away with just running the same run play essentially over and over and over again with a couple of different variations. And so you got to remember, right? Like coming out of halftime, before Aaron Rodgers started to do like a shimmy tap dance situation in the pocket when he had absolutely no time to do so, that game was 7-3 at halftime for the Steelers last week.
It was, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so, like how impressed could you possibly be here with the Bills from that game? And again, we start, using data points, look ahead lines, et cetera, to sort of extrapolate where their market rating necessarily is. They're a pick 'em next week against New England in New England, which again, really interesting game. But like honestly, that's kind of as low as that was going to be, right? Like the Bills all season long were probably going to be a favorite, a small favorite at the very least,
Yeah.
in New England when you compare Buffalo to anytime they go to Kansas City. In the past, being sort of, the market is not unwilling to make the Bills a road favorite against a really good team. And so that is kind of a downgrade for the Bills, but not an excessive one. Meanwhile, you've got the Bengals, who fundamentally, like, nobody knows how to rate this team. We talked about it last week with Burrow. Slightly above average was their rating coming into the season, right? 9.5 wins was their win total. Again, the defense was a reason that we were like maybe not all psyched about, thinking that they're going to win 10 games, betting against them to make the playoffs. Man, I'm a little bit worried about them to not make the playoffs bet here because again, like it's a Joe Burrow thing for me. I think the team, like Dallas with Dak Prescott, is an above average team as long as Joe Burrow is playing on the team. And so, maybe they get T. Higgins back. We'll see. He was still in concussion protocol to start this week. That would obviously be a considerable help. But again, you saw the fill-in guys scoring touchdowns last week, the Yoshi Vosses of the world and Tanner Hudson making plays. So, again, you're getting a ton of points here with a Bills team or against a Bills team that we're still not super stoked about. Because again, they played one nice half because they were able to bloody Aaron Rodgers on one play that turned that game entirely and were able to stop the run against the Steelers. Well, that's not really what the question is this week, right? The Bengals are a pretty good run team all of a sudden with Chase Brown, and it would be nice for the Bills to stop the run. But like Joe Burrow's also fine with slinging it around on 40 attempts. I think this game's gonna be a lot like that Buccaneers game in Buffalo from 3 weeks ago, and you'd be like, well, the Bills covered that game. Dude, I was on the Bills that game. That did not feel like a game that the Bills were like set to cover. And so maybe it kind of ends up that same way. But again, I'd rather take the points in that situation. And, by the way, I also kind of don't really know what to make of this Bengals market rating because next week they are 3-point home underdogs to the Ravens in the look ahead line.
Yeah.
And like that really does not jive with A, the fact that they just won in Baltimore, or B, some of the ratings adjustments to any of those teams. So if you wanted to just go on the look ahead and grab that +3 at home against the Ravens, maybe that changes because the
Run.
Bills win this game. Maybe the Bills win this game comfortably, and the Ravens win their game comfortably, and it looks like maybe the sort of bubble has popped on the Bengals. But I'd take +3 in my back pocket, even at sort of the minimum a week ahead of time in that game. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, interesting times for sure for Bills Mafia. We'll see how that one plays out. Interesting times as well in the ATL as Kirk Cousins and company are hosting the Seattle
Yeah,
Seahawks.
boy.
Oof, my guy, Kirk Cousins. The Falcons are 7-point underdogs at home, and they did not look too good last week, although that game against the Jets was really, really close. I mean, other than
Yeah.
the checkdowns to Bijan, which is all I was begging Kirk Cousins to do, not
That's
much
right.
else was getting done, but that was enough for my fantasy team. Side note, enough of my fantasy team.
Second sighting of the fantasy team today.
Right?
Oh, God.
On the flip side,
Yeah.
Seahawks just continue to roll, and the Seahawks roll against bad teams. The Falcons, I think, are a bad team. I would normally hesitate on taking 7 points on the road, but not in this instance. Give me the Seahawks. I will lay the 7 points with the team that their offense just seems to continue to cook in whatever scenario. And yeah, nothing in Atlanta is telling me that they should be stopping this train.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because if you look at the NFL odds, right, for the Super Bowl, and I believe right now it's still Rams at the top. We'll talk about them, I think, in a bit. And also the Seahawks are second. And after you start moving around the ratings and stuff like that, because again, we'll talk about some of these other teams that have taken a hit. The Seahawks are third right now because the Packers have kind of obviously off of that win against the Lions gotten a bump up. And that's part of the reason why they're 6.5-point favorites against the Bears. So the Seahawks are second in like most likely to win the Super Bowl from an odds perspective, and they are third in the market ratings, but they haven't ticked past into the 70s yet, right? And that 70s mark is that kind of like Super Bowl type favorite type thing. And it's interesting that they have that low of a rating and that high of an NFL Super Bowl championship odds, because like the road to the Super Bowl has the Rams, the favorite for the Super Bowl, directly in their way, right? Like they are probably, again, who knows, but it certainly looks as if they'd be a wild card team. Again, we don't really know, obviously, for sure, but you never see sort of the same two teams in the same division essentially at the top of the odds board, which is sort of my point here. And to me, that indicates like a level of respect for the Seahawks that probably should be on the same level as the Rams, right? And again, these good teams, just give them long enough and eventually they're going to kind of drop one, and you're probably going to be surprised because you've given them enough time to win all these other games to make you feel like they're kind of unbeatable. And so when the Rams go and lose last week, you go, oh, wait, like they could lose. We didn't know. And it's like, yeah, just give enough time. And so like the Seahawks, meanwhile, like aren't being rated in the same way that the Rams are. And so my point is that like if you just did, or you tightened it up a little bit, right? You moved them into the 70s, you would get more than a -7 here. And I think that's what the market was trying to do, or at least odds makers were trying to do, because this line opened -7.5.
Okay.
And so money is coming on the Falcons at +7.5.
Okay.
To move it down off, onto the key number of 7. And I just look at that and I go, what have you guys been watching over the last couple of weeks? And again, this might be, and again, I'll have to check here. We always do the caveat, right? Like it's it's Wednesday of the week, and we got to find out, like, hey, if Drake London plays, that's a really big deal because of this offense, right? And he is, last week he's missed 2 straight weeks. He's questionable, is questionable enough to move the Falcons rating up to a sort of more respectable level, because I wasn't giving them a ton of respect after the Saints game. It's why we landed on the Jets. The market was actually a little bit interested in the Falcons last week, moving them from -2.5 to -3 on the road against the Jets. And again, that's a close game. That could go either way. There's long field goals getting made and missed left, right, and center. But the point is like they still failed. The market was still wrong in bumping the Falcons up, grabbing -2.5 and bumping that up to 3, where the Jets +3 was widely available throughout the weekend. And so I just go like, yeah, the Falcons are just going to keep kind of disappointing here or not be impressive even in a win against the Saints 2 weeks ago. And now, we're going to do the weight class thing where you go from playing the Saints, who were just clunking their heads together in that game against the Falcons, and then the Jets, who are kind of trying to clunk their heads together a little bit in that game, to now it's the Seahawks
Yeah.
indoors. Like,
Yeah.
some of these teams, right, where you go, like, are they built for where they play, or do they just play where they play, right? And I
Yeah.
think the Seahawks like might be just a really good indoors team if given that sort of opportunity. I'm
Mhm.
completely terrified of what Jackson Smith and Jigba might do in this game, as somebody whose offensive player of the year positions now both include Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey. And so the only way that I get jammed there is if JSN keeps lighting it up. Now, again, he had sort
Yeah.
of a down week last week, and maybe teams are finally like, screw it, man, we're putting two guys on you on every play.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. I'd let the Cooper Cups of the world try to beat me. Do I have any faith in the Falcons to sort of have that level of a game plan in this one? Dude, not really, man. And again, like you can have some good vibes after beating the Saints and kind of feeling like, oh, we're 4-7, like we're not out of it yet. I mean, I guess if you look at the standings, you'd immediately go, we're out of it. Losing to the Jets to go 4-8, and now it's still Kirk Cousins out there, and it's like,
Tough go.
what? Yeah, like what are we even bothering with this for? And so that's the concern down the stretch here is like teams can talk themselves into just about anything. It's all right, cool, you're still way out of this thing, and like what level of competition do you sort of need to be displaying here to not get blown out by the Seahawks? I don't know if the Falcons necessarily have that level.
Yeah, I'm not sure they have that level either. That's why we're on the Seahawks -7 in this one. Uh, Continuing on to the Bucs, who are 8.5-point home favorites against the aforementioned Saints. The Bucs got a
Yeah.
win last week, but it was pretty ugly. They kind of like outlasted the Cardinals, if that makes sense. Or maybe as
Mhm.
we get to the Cardinals game after, we'll explain how the Cardinals just continue to lose in interesting fashion week in and week out. But yeah, now I'm supposed to lay 8.5 points with them on the road. I don't know if I like that, especially against a Saints team that I feel like their destiny this season is just to be a backdoor cover team, right? And you're just
Yeah,
watching, you're like, Shook
that's
looked
right.
all right there down the stretch at the end of that game. He
Ugh.
looked all right. Like we say that every week. 8.5 points is just too much for me to lay with the Bucs team that hasn't looked good in weeks. Like they forget about what the result is, win, lose, cover, what, like just overall
Yeah,
watching them, it's been a struggle. Excuse me. So I'm going to take the 8.5 points here with the Saints.
yeah, I am too. God, man, Chris Olave, just catch that ball, dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
Catch that ball. Give me the
Yeah.
win. We had some
So
round
much,
robins
so
that were
much
on
going
that
on.
were yeah, we had some round robins that were riding on the Saints being able to come through, and Shook he throws a dime, and again, like a top level receiver is supposed to catch that pass. Thoroughly annoyed with the Saints who have Taysom Hill on the roster, just like running 4th and 1 sneaks with
Yeah.
Tyler Shuck. It's
Yeah.
like everybody's got a 4th and 1 play now, a variation
Mhm.
of the tush push or just a flat out tush push. And you have the dude who's like built for this in Taysom Hill, and it's
Mhm.
like no 4th and 1 in
Like someone doesn't like him.
yeah, it's just oh god, I didn't want to relive that. But the point is like yeah, they're hanging in there, right? Like the defense metrically not great, but like
Mhm.
the Dolphins' offense is pretty good, and they weren't able to do that much against the Saints. And then you watch the Tampa Bay last week, and Arizona's doing all again, as you mentioned, right? All of the things to like kind of screw that up, and a better team, I think, if we're being honest, when it comes to the Buccaneers, a better team would have blown out that Cardinals team
Yeah.
and taken advantage of the things that the Cardinals just do on a weekly basis to be like, I think this team's better than they should be. And it's like, why shouldn't they be better? And you just watch them do dumb stuff. And so, yeah, man, I don't, this is one of these teams where I'm like, I have no real interest in laying it like a ton of points in the same way that when, I reference the Jags next week against the Jets, it's honestly, it's just kind of the same game. And so, yeah, like, nothing really more to sort of add on that, where, I still have some question marks about the Buccaneers offense. It's still very much like Baker Mayfield, like getting shot up with horse tranquilizers and just going out there and like, I don't care, man. Like, I'm doing it. And you're like, all right, Baker, man, like you do you, my friend, but like it doesn't seem like it's, that's going to last all that long. He ends up going what 15 for 24 for 152 last week. Um, or last time that they played the Saints.
Mhm.
Wasn't last week. He was 18 for 24 for 194. That's why I was getting those two confused because they're
Yeah.
essentially the same level of production. And it's just like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm going to need more out of you from like a pass offense type of thing here for you to get a lead, stretch it, and then not be sort of vulnerable to a potential backdoor situation for the Saints, if that's even what's required.
Right. Yes, that last part. I like that. I see what you did there. I see what you did
hmm
there.
hmm
We'll keep it going with the aforementioned Cardinals, who are at home in an NFC West showdown with the LA Rams. Rams favored by 7.5 points, fresh off of one of the bigger upsets of the year as the Rams lost to the Panthers. And if we're just being frank here, which I think I said that earlier in the pod, a lot of being frank today,
Yeah, just a
but
couple of Franks
just a couple of
for
Franks
today.
hanging out.
Yeah.
But the reason for said Rams loss, the MVP favorite, Matthew Stafford, with 4 picks, including a pick 6. There's a fumble mixed in there. There's just a lot going on. But bottom line is, I don't expect that to happen 2 games in a row for Matthew Stafford, especially not against like a division rival as well. The 7.5 points is a lot. Do I want to lay 7.5 points in a division matchup? No. But then I mentioned the things that I just did about the Arizona Cardinals. They keep losing the close games, and a lot of games they could have, won, but they
Mhm.
just keep messing around, miss kicks, turnovers, just all this stuff that's not going to go well against a Rams team that should be a little more buttoned up after last week. I'm on the
Yeah, just
Rams laying 7.5.
And just so we don't get letters, because I know people like to write, actual letters, throw them in the mail
Mhm.
to sort of complain if we get something sort of slightly wrong. 2 interceptions, 1 fumble lost for Stafford last
Sorry,
week.
my
But
bad,
to the
my bad.
point, he literally only has 4 interceptions all season. So he doubled his interception total
Mm,
in that game. And all of that is to say, or sort of to trigger the general concept of like how the Rams lost that game and honestly how they didn't cover. And if you'll recall last week, what did we say? We're like, I don't know how, and I can't wait to see it. But the Panthers are going to
this is
somehow
true.
cover this game,
This is
right? And like
true.
we
That was
didn't
the
mean
thing
we
that
took the
happened.
Panthers.
Yep,
It was just
yep,
like
yep.
I'm going to take the Rams for discussion points. We didn't
Mhm.
bet it. We didn't have it
Yep.
over at the window, but it was just like I don't know how it's going to happen because we just watched this Panthers team dreadful half the time, including on
That's the
Monday,
NFL.
and like outstanding, but like no more polar, right? Like it's just the if the I need to stretch the Panthers' range from like normally we keep it within kind of a 15-point range. I need to stretch their range from 20 to 80. Like it's a full
Yeah.
scale deal here, where sometimes they just look outstanding, and I shouldn't say that they look outstanding because I'm going to essentially call that win last week a fluke. And here's why. One, you mentioned the 2 interceptions, obviously the fumble lost, right? But that one
Mhm.
interception where it goes off the helmet of Derek Brown for the
Okay.
Panthers,
Yep.
and that ball can, it's not ideal. Like, that ball gets intercepted sometimes, but it
Yeah.
also could have gone a billion different ways. It could have been just batted straight down, but instead it goes between his arms, off his helmet, up into the air, and gets intercepted. Now, will Stafford want the pick 6 back about a million times, over a million times? Of course he would. But we're also looking at fourth down here. Panthers are 3 for 3 on fourth down. Like, is that Bryce Young's like greatest down? Is fourth? Like he just, his like quarterback rating on fourth down is like 200, which is not, I don't think, possible. And so it's like I kept feeling in that game like there was kind of one mistake. There's like a Chuba Hubbard check down throw, or the interception, or the fourth. These other plays where you just go, oh man, like they've made the Rams angry, right? They've made the Rams bleed their own blood, and now the Rams are going to like get down to it. But there was just enough scenarios that the Panthers were able to kind of get away with over and over and over again. And you just kind of, if you're watching that game closely, you're going like, man, this is weird. This is just a weird game. And so I don't expect another weird game to come
Yeah.
from the Rams, as you mentioned, right? With regards to like sort of being buttoned down. So yeah, it's a lot of points to lay on the road, but like again, if you're going to have one team kind of screw something up and have fluky plays go against them, maybe that team is the Cardinals, right? Like they do that all the time. So I shouldn't say that I've made some sort of like definitive decision on this game because again, it is a lot of points,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
for a home team that is getting healthier, by the way, right? Like the
Yep.
Cardinals are getting their defensive guys back. cornerbacks. Max Melton still is questionable for this game. Walter Nolan's questionable for this game. But otherwise, if those guys are able to play, you basically have a healthy Cardinals team, especially including Marvin Harrison returning last week. So again, maybe there's enough sort of health here for the Cardinals to be able to keep this game close, but they're going to have to play a good game. Let's just put it that way. They're going to have to play a good game because we know that the Rams are going to play a good game, because the idea of the Rams playing 2 games where it's just sloppy and things go kind of against them, yeah, that seems unlikely. So can the Cardinals play a good game is going to be sort of the question that I'm asking over the course of the rest of the week.
No, I get it. I totally get it. I will be watching intently for that one as well. I won't be watching as intently to our next game, but interesting still nonetheless. As we have the Dolphins as 2.5-point favorites on the road, taking on the Jets. I think the Dolphins have won 3 in a row. Do I have that correct? They've won some games in a row. I don't know what they're trying to do there in terms of tricking themselves into wait, how close are we? What's happening right now? They just got to keep feeding Achane. I guess that's the key to them, their success. Get back to basics there and have Tua do less. But flip side, the Jets, they did it for us last week as 2.5-point dogs at home to the Falcons. And they've covered, if I have this correct, the last 6 out of 7 weeks the Jets have covered, which doesn't really make much sense, but it's kind of crazy here, depending on where you got the number on certain games, right? Remember they had that, was it 12.5 to 13 or whatever, but point remains, they're in the mix. They're spicy.
Yeah, but
so for that reason, I'm on the Jets. Give me the 2.5 points at home here. And I'll take that.
Yeah, and they sort of practiced against Devon Achane last week with Bijan Robinson, right?
Yes.
Like those two, the Falcons and Dolphins are just kind of like marching along going like, we got one move and it's just an electric running back. And like, that's kind of all we got. Otherwise it's pretty sketchy across the board. Like they have talked themselves into whatever. I don't know. Like, I don't know if they had a choice, right? Because I think part of the equation is, while everybody looks at them from the outside, the Dolphins that is, and is like, you need to fire, Mike McDaniel. You and I talked about the idea of like, why is it Mike McDaniel's fault that they have absolutely no offensive line talent and they have no defensive talent either, right? Like that's the GM's fault. Well, what happens? GM gets fired. You go, okay, like that makes some sense. And I'm not saying that we couldn't fire Mike McDaniel out here. I'm just saying like maybe it's not necessarily all his fault. And so part of the equation is that the out for Tua's contract isn't after this season, it's after next season.
Oof.
And so the reality is that it's Tua is going to be the Dolphins quarterback next season. So who gives the Dolphins the best opportunity to work with Tua and be able to at least have a good offense? And then it's up to the general manager to fill in the blanks from a defensive perspective, right? The new general manager, whoever that may be. And so just the reality is like, that's why Mike McDaniel's back next year. That's why we know Tua is going to be back next year. And so once that's sort of settled, where it's like, yeah, these are just the guys, man. Like, these are the guys for this year. These are the guys for next year. And like, do whatever you can kind of do here. That's what sort of led here to Miami playing a little bit better. Now, a bit better means wins, and all of a sudden they're 5-7, and we have to start sweating out like win total deals here with the Dolphins, which is like not ideal. But like also those 3 wins. I mean, the Buffalo game, that was pretty wild. The Saints game where they kind of survived. I mean, the 2-point conversion return like was the key to that game. And imagine a 2-point conversion return being the key in the end to that game. And then an overtime win against the Commanders, right? So it's like, it's not the most impressive little run here, but it is a little run. Problem is, right, that's home game, Spain game, home game. Now it's 2 outdoors, Jets, winter, December, Dolphins, December, Dolphins, cold weather, yada, where like they didn't look like they were any interested in playing football against the Browns earlier on in the season. And you really just kind of need to show up to beat the Browns, even though Myles Garrett is like swinging multiple human beings over his head, it seems like, and clunking them together. Like, just an absolute fiend. So yeah, man, like I don't like the Dolphins on the road in like cold weather scenarios, but the problem is their next 2 games in those types of scenarios are against the Jets and your Steelers. And so it's going to be tough to be like, all right, give me the Jets, give me the Steelers. But again, like last week, I just mentioned, right? Falcons and Dolphins really very similar teams. Same market, right? Where
Yeah.
this time the Dolphins are -2.5, even some -3s starting to kind of populate here as I kind of do my spin around the betting market here.
Yep.
You can find 3 with a little juice here. So again, very much like last week, where it's like if you can get the Jets +3 at home against a mediocre Southern team, like
Yeah.
I don't hate it. It's not going to be a fun time watching that game. It's not going to be a party.
Yeah.
But listen, honestly, for no other reason, the Jets have Nick Folk, who's like drilling field goals this season quietly because nobody cares about the Jets, but like just absolutely ripping like a 53-yarder in bad weather. And it's like, man, that might be the difference with some of these games, especially these kind of like grim matchups where their scoring might be a little bit at a premium.
I saw that. He was teammates with Aaron Glenn, right? Which is just funny. Like that's just crazy to be
That's
teammates
right.
with the former
Okay.
coach, or sorry,
Yeah.
with the current coach is just weird. But
Listen,
yeah,
there is a lot of worse field goal kicker decisions being made out there than just like, yeah, I played with that guy, and so I trust him.
uh, yes, I'm familiar with Jake Moody's work, who's supposedly good again. I don't know if that's happening, but yeah,
Just
just move,
striping kicks on Sunday night, buddy.
just gonna move on. Just gonna move on. I'm not mad.
Yeah.
You talked about cold weather games. We got another possibility here with the Cleveland Browns, 4.5-point favorites at home to the Titans. This is a tough game. I got to be honest. I've switched back and forth like 8 times on this one here. It says Shador and the Browns at -4.5 is a pick that I will be making, which is funny because it's not really about Shador. I'm thinking this is a defense game here. Watching that Niners game was interesting because the Niners are just such a well-run offense, so it takes them a second to figure out what's being done, and they got all the counters to score against your really good defense. I don't know if that's going to happen against the Titans. My issue here, and I guess this is my question for you.
Mhm.
It's Browns -4.5. I don't think Shador will be able to put up points, but I also don't think the Titans should be able to put up points. So is this a scenario where it's going to be low scoring? You should just take the points.
This is a scenario where you're laying points with Shador Sanders, and I don't know what circumstance that's a good idea. Like we were, like, again, it's not far removed from why would you lay points with the Raiders?
Yeah.
Even, you know what I mean? Even if, like, it's funny because like people were willing to lay points with the Raiders against Shador Sanders. Meaning they
Correct.
thought so little of Shador Sanders that they were like, we don't care who you play. We're going to take the favorite and we're going to lay points. Now, you
Yeah.
and I were like, no, that's not.
Yeah.
This whole thing isn't just about the quarterback, and the Browns
No.
are good enough, and frankly, the Raiders are bad enough that we're going to take the points and we're going to give the Browns here a decent chance of winning the game.
Mhm.
And then the next week, having just won with the Browns,
Yep.
we saw the line with San Francisco coming down throughout the week, by the way, to like 4.5. Not that 5.5 to 4.5 is some massive move, but you go, all right, like you're going to only ask the 49. I said to you, I think I said to a couple different people, sort of 49ers friends of mine, just like, if the 49ers don't win this game and do so comfortably, there needs to be a federal investigation, or like something's gone horribly obviously wrong. And sure enough, like they win that game comfortably because nothing goes horribly wrong and the FBI does not need to get involved. And so, the point is like I can win with the Browns and Shador one week and then bet against them the next week, all sort of understanding that like there's a limit to how bad the Browns can be because of some of the other sort of skill levels that they
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
particularly the defense and Myles Garrett. Now they got a couple injuries after last week on the defense, so I don't love that either.
No.
All that, point is like the betting market seems to be okay with Shador Sanders laying points because of how bad the Titans are. And it's worth mentioning, like, as much as the Titans, have infuriated, because they're like so often like getting so many points at home, and like, they did 2 covers there after their bye week, and then just look like absolute dog bleep last week, and just complete disinterest, taking dumb penalties. Mike McCoy's just standing there like a statue. Nobody cares what Mike McCoy thinks
Yeah.
on that team. And so I say all of that going like, let's bet the Titans on the road here. The schedule for the Titans going backwards, right? Jacksonville last week, a team that all of a sudden the betting market's into and has all of a sudden accrued first place status. Seattle, Houston, the Chargers, the Colts, the Patriots. Right, that's 6 straight games against like bona
Pretty good.
fide sort of playoff or playoff adjacent. Taking like the schedule is kind of tough. And then
Yeah.
you go back further than that, start of the season, right? Denver, Rams, Colts, Texans the other time. There's playing the Cardinals on the road. We all know what happened in that game. And then the Raiders on the road, where they lose that game to the Raiders. But again, as we've talked about, they had like 1 yard less than the Raiders in that game. So from an opponent perspective, it's really kind of just the easiest game that the Titans have had all season long. I guess maybe the exception being that Raiders game. And so,
teams get up for that.
Again, yeah, and it's just like, oh, we could win this game. And again, if they have any pride after what they put on tape last week, which was just a series of just infuriatingly stupid penalties and just, a fiasco. Or you put it this way, like every other game this season, they probably haven't had the better quarterback. And that includes Davis Mills. And that includes Geno Smith. And that includes Kyler Murray, who knows what his status is, right? And it's like, this is the first time that the Titans have the better quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you got 2 rookies here. You got the number 1 pick and then the 5th round or whatever Shedeur ended up falling.
The people's number 1 pick.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
The against all odds number 1 pick.
And I don't know what the sort of internal, opinion is with some of these dudes, whether they think do the Titans think that Shedeur is like the, great next hope, or are they annoyed that Shedeur gets credit for frankly not being very good? And do they get to sort of salivate at the idea of going up there and kind of messing, his deal up? And so again, fundamentally, you're laying 4 points with Sanders in a game that, again, it's the best chance the Titans have to win the rest of the way. Again, maybe their home game against the Saints is probably, week 17, the next chance for them to win. And again, from an organizational standpoint, they should still be trying because they don't need the number 1 pick in the same way that some of these other teams do. So, yeah, this could have all been sort of cut short by me just saying, we were really laying points with Shedeur Sanders. And that's, I think, is the crux of the handicap. But it is worth mentioning that, this is the easiest game that the Titans may have played all season. Yeah, so to speak.
That sound you hear is the pick changing.
I didn't. But
here's what I'm gonna say. That last play against the Niners last week, where it was 4th and 20 something. I don't know what it was at the very end of the game. And Shedeur, who I'm assuming here, but I'm assuming he's very conscious about his stats, decides that on 4th and 20, whatever, I'm not even gonna pass it. I'm gonna scramble for 5 yards and slide. I was just like, what are you what is happening here? I'm like, that only strikes me as someone who's locked in on what their stats are and doesn't want to throw a pick. And that's not conducive to team play. That's not conducive to just making the right play. That just sounds like me.
He's the NFL version. He's the NFL version of NBA players not wanting to heave a half court shot because they don't want and the NBA literally having to change the rule so that people would take 3/4 of the court heaves. In the slight element of entertainment that is, the NBA was like, yeah, we got to change the rule for these guys because so many don't want to do it. And if there's anybody who would sort of fit in that mindset, I think it's Shedeur Sanders, who's like, I'm not throwing any Hail Marys here. I'm not throwing this up into coverage.
He could have at least thrown a 10-yard out or something, or whatever. Anyways.
Yeah. No.
Craziness.
And he's laying points, by the way. Laying points this week.
Laying 4.5. Yeah. Pick switch. Tennessee plus 4.5. We move on to the Vikings. The Vikings are at home, favored by 1.5 against the Commanders. The Vikings might be getting the worst quarterback play in the league. And that even includes our guy Shedeur, who we just talked about right now. I don't know who I'd rather have, Max Brosmer or Shedeur Sanders right now. That's a toss-up. It's a good old PTI toss-up right there. That pick he threw last week, I don't know what was going on there. That was very Jimmy G-esque. Who's my other guy? Carson Wentz-esque that pick that Max Brosmer threw last week. Justin Jefferson, I feel your pain, my dude. I feel your pain. What are we doing here on this one? I think I'm on. If Jane Daniels is back, sure, maybe that's something that'll have the Commanders looking a little more spicy here, as they almost came away with a victory on Monday night. I don't know. I'm on the Commanders here at the +1.5, and I'll hope that Jane Daniels is back.
Probably not a great sign that after and sort of throughout that game, that like everybody was really proud of the Commanders for like trying.
Good job, good effort, guys.
Right. Yeah.
Was
you know
that
what I
the
mean?
Heat
Like
game, the little kid that was like, good job, good effort, guys.
Yeah. Like, you know, like Tariq and Collinsworth are like, oh, you know, this game didn't think it was going to be great, but like the Commanders showed up, and it's like, that's like the job. Especially like on a Sunday night at home, and the last time we saw you at home in prime time, you were getting like done and dusted by the Seahawks. Like,
Yep, that
of
happened.
course they showed up for that game. And so I guess my point is like, do we change the rating for the Commanders, who, you know, I don't think Daniels is back this week. Yeah, I don't think he only just, I don't know that he's even been sort of cleared to practice or whatever. But it's funny that like that game felt like a jump and hug game when they didn't actually win. So there was no hugging at the end.
Covered.
Like, it might have been a jump or two, but that's right. Like, we scored like a couple of times to like keep the game going. Like, that was awesome. So my point is, you know, when this game gets lined, the Commanders were actually lined as a small favorite in this game.
Okay.
Like when the odds makers come out with it, and it's like, well, does that have to do with the Commanders, or does that have to do with the Vikings, who, I will say this, right? Like Max Brosmer, if and when he gets another start, people are going to look back and be like, 4 interceptions, you know, 85 yards, or like whatever it is, and like really trash the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that like if you watch that game closely, his team failed him in a way that I don't think I've been as disappointed in like a team all season long, with regards to like rallying around and like being kind of locked in. And that includes his coach, because that game's 3-0. And I didn't get as much time as I sort of want to on my own podcast, because I was talking so much about college football this past week. But like, if you really want to get into that like deal with that game is 3-0 at the end of the second quarter. And the Vikings have an opportunity. And listen, everybody would have been bummed out about it because it's 4th and 1. Like, give your chance, team a chance to score a touchdown. Like, we're not allowed to score field goals anymore. But like, you just held the Seahawks for 27 minutes to just 3 points. Yeah. And if you understand, you and I talk about all the time, understand what game that you're in. Right. And we're going to talk a lot about that come the playoff time, and sort of rehashing some of these playoff games when they come. Understanding as a head coach, like, what game are you in? Are you in the 31-31 game? Right? It's a Dan Campbell thing. Are you in that game? Like, do you know that that's the game that you're going to have to play? And then understand what game you need to be in, which is sort of like the second level of that. Going like, we can't be in a 31-31 game. Yeah. We have to be in a 3-3 at halftime game. And the way that the Vikings defense had Sam Darnold shook, and it was part of the handicap, right? Where you go, yeah, like Brian Flores knows about Sam Darnold. He's faced him in practice for a full season. And then you saw it for 27 minutes. Like, Sam Darnold could not do anything. And so they go for it on 4th down. And so again, like, I'd prefer them just taking the 3 points there. And if you're going to go for it on 4th down, I need it to not be in Max Brosner's hands, because again, who do you got? No, KYP, know your personnel, know what game you're in, know what game you need to be in. And so this whole like idea of like, we're going to roll it out. And as he's running, and again, you can't see where everybody else is just because of the nature of the camera angle. It's 4th down. And I will admit, I thought, as we sort of tend to on 4th down, especially when he's kind of running backwards, throw the ball. It's 4th down, right? How many times do we get mad at dudes because they throw, like your boy Shador, where he's just sliding instead of like throwing the ball? And so I think in Brosner's own mind, correctly in a way, where he's like, well, if I just throw this up and give it a chance, that we might sort of come down with it. And worst case scenario, instead of getting tackled on like the 20-yard line or the 15-yard line, at least the Seahawks would have the ball like at the 5-yard line. And our again, all of this stuff going through your head it's not going through your head like in full. But essentially, he knows on 4th down that you got to just throw the football. And like, yeah, he waits a half second because, by the way, the NFL is a faster speed than anything that he's had to deal with against a better defense than he's ever had to play before in a location that's a very difficult, by and large, place to play for opposing offenses. And so when he hucks it, it doesn't go the way that he wants it to go. And it just happens to go, speaking of sort of bad luck, directly into the hands of the linebacker for the Seahawks. And then all of a sudden 3-3 or even 3-0 going into halftime becomes 10-0.
Yeah.
And now you're by your own fault from a coaching perspective, you're in a different game. You're in the 2-score game. You're in the game that the Bengals were in when Joe Flacco threw the interception to the Steelers, right? Even the Steelers can finish off a 2-score game defensively. And so the Seahawks can. And so now we got to throw the ball a lot here. And you and I have talked about Justin Jefferson being checked out on this season, which doesn't really bode well for what I'm going to sort of say here from a betting perspective. Yeah, and it's not going to be Brosmer. It looks like it's going to be J.J. McCarthy. And God knows we were sort of – I don't even know if we were tricked into the idea because J.J. McCarthy could have had the same sort of statistics as Brosmer did last week. So, again, like I feel sort of cheated because I felt like that's a 3-3 game in the first half when we're getting 12 points.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all I really wanted out of life. And then all of a sudden it's a 10-point game essentially going into half. And like, that sucks. And so again, if the rest of the team tightens things up and you don't have Aaron Jones fumbling and you don't have Justin Jefferson mega checked out. And again, maybe he's just going to behave that way the rest of the year. Fine, cool, whatever. There's a reason this line has flopped back over to Minnesota -1.5 because we have to change the rating that got absolutely annihilated because of Brosner's general appearance in that game, right? Before the game even started, the Vikings rating got annihilated down into the low 30s. It's only really back to the high 30s to make the Vikings essentially equals to the Commanders, which like there haven't really been a point since the first few weeks of the season when like before Daniels got hurt and before that kind of got grim in Washington, that this would be the line, right? And so it sucks because it's like, are we betting on a team that's checked out here? Are we betting on JJ McCarthy? And the answer is like, yeah, because JJ McCarthy 2 weeks ago led the Vikings back to take a lead against the Bears at home. And they were very much in that game against the Ravens. And so as much as the trip to Lambeau didn't go great, and, you got concussion symptoms and stuff like that, I guess my point is like the rest of the team can show up here at some point, and the coach can show up. And whether that's to rally around Brosmer or rally around the quote-unquote quarterback of the future with J.J. McCarthy, this team's rating is so much lower than it has been all season with even McCarthy in there. It has to be the Vikings here. The bet has to, unfortunately, be the Vikings here because, again, you can get excited about what the Commanders did last week, but it's still a pretty significant upgrade for the Commanders to even be, especially when it was considered that they might be a road favorite in this game.
Yeah. No, I totally hear you. Pick is being changed. We're on the Minnesota Vikings here. You can hear the sound effects. Control room is on it. Minnesota -1.5. An interesting game there for sure. Maybe JJ McCarthy's been doing some studying during his week off. We shall see. But we keep it going here. We keep it going here before we get to the main event of Sunday night. And by main event, I just mean the Sunday nighter. But one more game before we get there, and that is the Broncos and the Raiders. And Broncos favored by 7.5 points on the road. Raiders are just a tough watch. Geno can't throw. Genty has like no lanes to run. Doesn't even matter how good Max Crosby and Brock Bowers are. It's just a bad watch for the Raiders here. And basically one of the only teams that I would take in this scenario where the Broncos are on the road and laying 7.5 points because that Broncos offense and Bo Nix is just so unpredictable. I wouldn't want to be laying 7.5 points with the Broncos, but here's what they have to do. Go play the Raiders. So here I am, laying 7.5 points on the road with the Broncos. That's all I got for you.
Tough, right? I mean, we just saw this game in Denver, and it's 10-7, right? And so you go like, well, wait, you're now going to go on the road, and you're going to ask this team that they're reputation all season long has been they just don't win and cover these types of games, right?
Yep.
Basically every single time that didn't involve kind of Jake Browning.
Yeah.
And so anytime non-Jake Browning involved, they're like, yeah, okay, we got something going here. Yeah, it's
Tough look for
so
Jake
it's
Browning.
yeah, well, yeah, that he's got his own deal. Yeah, it's brutal, man, because you have such a good player on offense with Brock Bowers. You have such a good player on defense with Max Crosby that, like, sometimes those two guys and their impact with, Bowers making catches the way that he did on with his second touchdown of the game, I think it
Yeah.
was, where he makes that catch. And you're just like, God, man, like, how do you guys not make more out of this guy? That it's tough to be like, well, let's lay the points here because there's at least something that the Raiders, in theory, can do. My problem is, again, you mentioned the run game, right? Like, I had sort of an alt line thing on Genty that might, giving him maybe 20 carries, or they just
Okay.
said, screw it. Like, we're just going to give him 20 carries. Because, obviously, new offensive coordinator, right? Chip Kelly known for, like, liking to throw the ball,
Mhm.
and obviously an offensive line that's pretty brutal. But they gave Genty 15 carries in a game they lost by 17 points. But he only had 31 yards because
Yeah.
that's just how bad the Raiders' offensive line is. And it's like you could tell if they were getting anything out of it, they would have maybe given him
They're
the
trying.
20 carries. Yeah, because it's like, it's 15 when you run for 31 yards. Like, it's still a lot of carries. And of course, Smith only has 23 pass attempts, right? Which tells you, like, my God, this team was only basically on the field for 40 offensive plays in this game. And it's
Yeah.
just like 46, I think, was the total number of plays that they ran. I think that includes punts as well. I'm not sure how they sort of keep track of that, but 23 pass attempts and 18 sort of rushes when it comes to all three, two running backs and Geno Smith. So it's just like, I I told myself I wasn't going to bet on the. Put it this way, I told myself I wasn't going to bet on the Raiders
Yeah.
anymore this season, and I didn't
Yeah.
do it last week, right? Even during the points, where 10 was available. Um, and I'm not going to do it this week, but that doesn't mean I have to lay the points here with the
Yeah. I
Broncos
know what you're saying.
either. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a type of game where maybe you just tease it down from 7.5 to 1.5, and that's just kind of the only thing you do with
And
regards to this
everybody
game.
goes home happy, right? Everybody goes home
Well,
happy, except maybe
I
Jim.
mean, imagine the Raiders winning, but again, like, they weren't that far from winning when this game was played in Denver a couple of weeks ago. So,
True.
man, I'm ready for anything.
Stranger things have happened indeed. We move on to Sunday
Mhm.
Night Football. We got the Chiefs at home laying 3.5 points against the Texans. Tough loss for the Chiefs against Dallas. I mentioned it earlier where Patrick Mahomes got outdueled by Dak Prescott. That was a thing that happened. I watched it. I was enjoying
Mhm.
an American Thanksgiving and did not enjoy, but you know what I'm saying. Now the Chiefs are in a spot where they need to win out to make the playoffs, essentially. So I thought
Yeah.
last week that was a scenario and that was the must-win game. And that's when I was putting everything on the Chiefs saying, this is the game. They got to do it. The Cowboys aren't that good, blah, blah, blah. And they were favored by 3.5 points at home. Or no, sorry, on the road. And now they're coming
On the road,
home,
yeah.
favored by 3.5 points. And I'm still looking at this and being like, I can't take the Chiefs by more than a field goal. I just can't do it. And if one
Mhm.
of the things I firmly have believed in this season has been the Texans defense, that also doesn't bode well for the Chiefs going up against that tough defense. So all in all, it's like if the Chiefs are going to win, which I can't even guarantee that anymore after watching them lose to Dallas, if they are going to win, it's going to be by a field goal. This line is 3.5. I'm on Houston plus
Right.
3.5 in this one. And it's a tough one. It's a
Yeah.
very tough one.
Yeah, classic scenario, right? Where you got to pay the juice for plus 3.5. You can also pay the juice for -3.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the big question marks, right? Like, Trey Smith misses the game last week, and now you've got an interior offensive line issue against a team with a good interior defensive front, right?
Yeah.
So, like, didn't really bode all that well. But you get the things that you need to get, right? The Chiefs get the touchdown early on. They get the Dak Prescott interception
Yeah.
that we sort of had included in our betting portfolio that day, and it was like, oh yeah, right away. It's like, boom, here we go. And then, as you mentioned, right, like the Cowboys offense being that good, and I think that's the sort of key here, where it's like, yo, we have this understanding of the Chiefs defense being sort of capable, if things aren't going well for the offense, to essentially buy time for the
Yeah.
offense. And that didn't happen against the Cowboys. There was no buying of any time for the offense to sort of be able to come through in the end.
Mhm.
I call me stubborn, call it fundamentally a rating issue, right? Even if you only give 1.5 for the Chiefs. Now again, you can do Arrowhead, you can do 2 points for them if you want for home field advantage. And if you do, that means that the Chiefs are 1 to 1.5 points better than the Texans. And again, call me stubborn, but like I still think they're more better. I think they are that much more better than the Texans, or more than that number sort of indicates, right? And again, we've talked about how the Chiefs have been rated up with the Rams, or the Rams sort of caught up to the Chiefs.
Mhm.
It was 2 weeks ago, right, where the Chiefs are 73
Mhm.
in our rating system, right? Essentially saying Super Bowl favorites, doesn't matter what their record is. Part of that was because they weren't all that healthy. Well, the problem is by the time they got healthy, all of a sudden the offensive line has gotten all dinged up here, right? Where you got tackles who are like there's, what does it say here? There's like a dislocated Josh Simmons, left tackle, first round pick, suffered a dislocated and fractured wrist against the Cowboys and is out indefinitely. That was like the report 6 days ago. And like he's still only listed as questionable.
Hmm.
What? Like, is he actually going to play in this game with that wrist? And so again, last week they had, Jawan Taylor was out, and Trey Smith was out. And so that's not great against the Texans defense. But fundamentally, the Texans, by the way, after winning that game in Indianapolis last week, we talked about the idea of like, oh, CJ Stroud is back. So the Texans rating is shot up, and like, has it gone too far just because CJ Stroud is back? Well, they only win that game on the road, and so the market can only do one thing. The only market can sort of pat itself on the back
Yeah.
and be like, yeah, like we got that right, and maybe the Houston deserves an even bigger bump in rating. But 22 out of 35, 276, no touchdowns and an interception for CJ Stroud. I don't know. I'm watching that game. I'm going, Davis Mills could have done that. Yeah, right. Whether it's like the good plays or the bad plays, right? I'm like, that could have been Davis Mills. And so again, like part of the reason we liked the Texans with Davis Mills is because we thought they might be better than their rating. And so like their rating goes up because of this. Their rating has cleared their. It's funny with Davis Mills, it went through the bottom of their range through one game with CJ Stroud, despite those pretty mediocre stats. They're now at a 61, right?
Yeah.
So if their range before the season was 45 to 60 or 45 to 59 type area, well, the Davis Mills version was in the low 40s for 3 straight weeks. We're just betting all the Davis Mills Texans. And then now, after that win, they're up to 61. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
the Chiefs number has gone from 73 down to 66.
Mhm.
So, like, it's a buy low on the Chiefs, not as low as it's ever been, because sometimes it gets really weird into that low
Yeah.
60s mark. But it's also a sell high on the Texans. That like if you just believe in the Texans, like knock yourself out. But the bar keeps getting raised for the expectation of how that they're supposed to play. And even these pretty good Texans teams over the last couple of years, when they go to Kansas City, it's always like 7, 7.5, 6.5,
Yeah.
4.5, I think, like last year.
Mhm.
And now it's 3. And this is under a circumstance where the Chiefs need to win more than they've ever needed to win before. Because, yeah, like in theory, it was a must win last week against the Cowboys, but they lost.
Yeah.
And they're still kind of alive, right? They're still somewhat alive
Just
here.
got to win.
And so, therefore, it couldn't have been a must win. But now we're talking about an AFC team who they're battling with, theoretically,
Yeah.
in the wild card.
Yeah.
And you go, well, now you really need, now this is a must win because it doesn't, not only does it hurt you to lose, it helps your opponent when they win. Didn't really, I mean, it helped Dallas, but it helped Dallas not against Kansas City in the standings because they're not in the same conference.
Yeah.
And so, like, this has to be an all in deal. Andy Reid's he did this weird thing about tickling throats and stuff. I don't even know what that means. I don't want to get into that with Andy.
Yeah. I got it.
Hopefully, it meant like a cheeseburger or something. I don't know. But like, yeah, man, if you can get -3 here at like better than -120, like I will go final sort of answer here, deal here with the Chiefs at home on a Sunday night. And listen, you're right. Like it's probably going to be that 3-point game, but if the Chiefs play to the level that they're capable of, they're going to win this game by more than 3 points. Unless the Texans are that much better than we ever sort of thought possible. And now I would make the case that the Texans got a pretty nice little break when Sauce Gardner left that game on like the first defensive play, and all of a sudden Nico Collins became an option.
Yeah.
Because again, we'll never know, or maybe we will when they play the next time. But like, I feel like Sauce Gardner was going to lock down Nico Collins in that game. And then what does CJ Stroud's numbers look like if Sauce Gardner's out there? And so, it sucks for the Colts because they're sitting there going like, well, we've got our full complement of cornerbacks, basically the second time all season, or like ever, basically, because obviously they just traded for Gardner. And now all of a sudden they're sitting there going like, okay, we have to reevaluate our entire secondary plan here. And they still don't really get gashed all that bad by CJ Stroud in that game. So, how great were the Texans in that game? And are they worthy of the rating that they're getting? I would make the case no. So while there are some issues with regards to the Chiefs, particularly health on the offensive line, listen, man, half the time these teams who are losing guys on the offensive line, like it doesn't matter. Didn't matter for the Bills last week. Doesn't matter for some of these other teams because they game plan around it. And if your move is we got to game plan around some offensive line issues, and you got Patrick Mahomes, you're still in a pretty good spot because, by the way, this team has had offensive line issues for like 5 years and they've worked around it every single time. It's why they drafted an offensive lineman in the first round because they're like, what sucks? Having to kind of work around these offensive line issues that we've had for the last 5 years. And so like they're like, let's not do that anymore. And just because they have to doesn't mean they can't. And so, yeah, man, like this, I think is certainly a buy low, sell high type situation. And if it's not, that means like the bullet has finally been kind of put into the Chiefs here for this season, which is of all the sort of turns of events, this would be the wildest. This would be the wildest.
If the pick has been changed, first off, the pick has been changed. What I was going to say, though, is if you've watched this pod and followed this pod for a long time, you know that I'm either taking the Chiefs or easily influenced into taking the Chiefs. So, I mean,
let's grab that -3, though. Let's grab that -3 shell.
Okay.
Let's get the control room in there.
We'll pay the juice.
-120 if you have to.
Let's go.
You're paying the juice at +3.5, right?
Heard it,
so it's
you
not.
Heard
it's
it
not like,
here.
Yeah.
You heard it here. -3 is the move there. And that is the cost of doing business. But hey, that's what we're doing here. That's is what we're doing. And shouts to the control room working hard behind the scenes to make sure that, everything is just cooking and moving here. -3, kids.
What a group.
-3. One more game. Speaking of -3s, we got the Eagles as 3-point favorites on the road on Monday night in LA to take on the Chargers. And the Eagles are just a mess right now, right? It's been bubbling over for weeks, but for them to finally come to this position where they lose to the Bears at home, they're getting booed off the field. The Cowboys are suddenly surging, and the Eagles got to be looking over their shoulder like, wait a second, what's happening here? This is just crazy. But I'm going to say this. I'm going to try to not overreact too much because in talking about the Bears, maybe my assessment of the Bears and the Cowboys was just a little bit off here. So as much as the Eagles, their struggles have been going on a lot here, and they might not be playing up to their full potential, we might say. Losing to the Cowboys and Bears might not be as bad as we think that is. So I'm not going to overreact. Now, laying 3 points on the road against the Chargers. This more has to do with what's going on with the Chargers. And yes, Justin Herbert, he played in that game after he broke something in his hand, his left hand, came back, played. They said he had surgery. Last I saw, they said he's questionable for this week. But then I heard the name Trey Lance. I was like, wait. Trey Lance?
I was waiting for that. I was waiting.
Is Justin Herbert's backup? That's what I'm hearing right now? I'm like, so this is a classic. Monday's a long ways away from when this game will be taking place. So obviously you need to know if Justin Herbert is in the game or not. I'm hearing Trey Lance music. That means I'm on the Eagles -3 here. And listen, the reality is just wait until Monday, see who the starting quarterback is for the Chargers. And I'm going to assume that if Trey Lance is in there, you're probably not going to want to be involved too heavily in the Chargers business. That's basically what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's way too far out to know what's going to happen.
Sure. And I think, I was waiting for you to ask me whether this was a Justin Herbert line or a Trey Lance line, right? Because I think that's a big deal. That
Kind
it's
of,
one thing to be like,
yes.
oh, just wait to find out who the quarterback is. It's like, okay, but the price is going to be altered in that way. And so, I put it to you this way here, right? Like this line suggests a downgrade on the Chargers,
Yeah.
right? And so is that because of Justin Herbert potentially playing with a bad hand? Maybe.
Hmm.
Does that suggest that Trey Lance is going to play? No, because it's going to have to go a lot further than sort of the low 50s um, to excuse or sort of be prepared for a Trey Lance appearance. As much
Yeah.
as you want to say, like, oh, Jim Harbaugh, like, coach him up, and whatever cliche you want to sort of hit everybody with here. But like,
Yeah.
the point is we
Trying
have
to
to
coach
be
'em up.
on the
Okay.
lookout and be and be prepared for such things. And so the other element is like it also could be, as we sort of infer sometimes, we got the range.
Hmm.
Sometimes instead of like results putting a line at a certain place because of a team rating, sometimes expectation is why a team might be lined at the low end of their range, right? So the Chargers are lined at the low end of their range.
Okay.
Part of that might just be the pretty glaring, obvious mismatch in this game, which is the Eagles' defensive line.
Hmm.
You want to do cliche fast track indoors
Hmm.
against the Chargers' offensive line.
Yeah.
And so even if Justin Herbert was healthy, I could envision. Now we know from a look ahead line standpoint, it was Philly minus 2.5, like flat
Yeah.
across the board, which implied like a little bit better of a Chargers rating than we have now.
Hmm.
Actually, probably a lot better because we also had a pretty high Eagles rating before last week, and then the Eagles go and lose at home. Everybody throws their hands up in the air, and now all of a sudden, like the Eagles rating has taken a hit. And so as
Yeah.
we open the show talking about oh, we might have to just bail on all of these sort of, NFL royalty, right? And so like Chiefs and Eagles are two really good examples of that. Except if the market changes its opinion on those teams, meaning that the Chiefs move from 73 down to 66 or 65,
Hmm.
meaning that if the Eagles, who were, up to 70 in that game against the Bears,
Hmm.
in that little run that they had post, Lions and Packers wins, going to Dallas, being 3.5 point road favorites at Dallas, right? That tells you that they were considered pretty close to equals with the Chiefs, because that's what the line was when the Chiefs went to Dallas 4 days later. Now, all of a sudden, the Eagles are back down to a very sort of reasonable mid 60s area, like the
Hmm.
Chiefs are. And so that's why we do this. And so we're not just blindly saying fade the Chiefs, fade the Eagles, fade
Yeah.
the Lions. It's only do so when the expectation for those teams is the high side of their range.
Yeah.
These teams are aligned as if they're going to play below average to what their expectation has been all season. And so the bar is considerably lower.
Hmm.
And you get the matchup here with the Chargers. Now, if you want to do the thing, like, and then we have no proof of this. So, this, when I'm asking you to sort of guess this, it's not a guess, it's more of an assess. What do you think the Chargers rating should be with Trey Lance?
Oh, I
Give
mean,
me a number out of 100 if
what are
Trey
they at
Lance is
now?
involved. They're at basically this line suggests they're 50, a straight up average
Oh,
team.
Trey Lance got to bring them down
50,
to like the low 40s, maybe even into the high 30s.
yeah. So, I mean, let's say 40, because we have seen bigger adjustments for starting quarterbacks going
Yeah.
down, the Joe Burrows of the world, et cetera. And, like, frankly, whatever you feel about Justin Herbert's sort of big picture career, you know, he might be more important relative to A, who his backup is,
Oh,
and B,
yeah.
what the Chargers do than any other quarterback, maybe.
Hmm.
I mean, Josh Allen would probably be an exception there. And certainly we saw what it looked like in Baltimore without Lamar Jackson. But the point is even if you were super conservative and you said like if Trey Lance plays and they are a 40 out of 100, that still leaves a point spread here of Philadelphia minus 7.5.
Yeah. And I'd still take
So you
Philadelphia
get a
if it's
chance.
Trey Lance. Yeah.
Right. So for me, it's like, why not just grab the -3 now?
Hmm.
And then go, okay, fine. Herbert's going to play. We know that he's not going to be healthy. But even if he's not, what's the move going to be? To
Yeah.
2.5? right?
Yeah.
That sort of look ahead line that we talked about. And so I kind of rather just grab -3 now and then go, cool. Like if it goes to 2.5 because Herbert plays, I'll take my chances trusting the Eagles. And as we've always said, right, the Eagles are more trustworthy when the line only requires them to essentially win, right? Or win by a field goal. It's when we're starting to talk about like 7s and 7.5s where it's like, are we sure they're that good? Are we sure that they can stay focused for 60 minutes? Are we sure that the offense can run smoothly enough to build a lead like that? That's not what's really being asked here. So this is as much as normally we usually like, it's Monday, it's so far away, like da 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 da. Let's use the so far awayness of this game to fade a guy who just had surgery on that left hand. That, by the way, even if he starts in the game, as Jalen Phillips and Jalen Carter and all the Jalens are coming in and and destroying his offensive line, how long does he last in that game?
Also
and if
true.
they go down 10 to 14 points, even if he could theoretically keep playing, do you keep him out there? And therefore, like, it's less likely that the Chargers come back than if Justin Herbert was, fully healthy and definitively playing. Meanwhile, as like an side note of all side notes, who do the Chargers play next week, Shell? You got that handy?
No, but I'll guess the
But
Chiefs.
you don't. And that's right. Didn't need to have it handy. The Chargers have the Chiefs next week.
Okay.
And so, we'll see what happens because they'll know what happens in that Chiefs game.
Yeah.
But the Chiefs are favored on Sunday night. They are theoretically more likely to win. And if the Chiefs win that game, then the Chiefs are no longer dead. And it means that the Chargers are going to need to win that game to keep the Chiefs off their back. Because if we're just handing the Broncos the division, I think that's sort of a fair assessment based on their record. It's not about who the best team is anymore, right? It's about their record in the standings. Then the Chargers have to be looking back at the Chiefs going like, man, we have the tiebreaker right now. But if we lose that game in Kansas City next week, right? And we got to get, if it means Justin Herbert and we have to kind of lose one here against Philadelphia to be able to win that, because winning this game and then losing to the Chiefs doesn't really do the Chargers that much good from a standings perspective.
Yep.
Like going 1-1 with the win over the Chiefs is more important than going 1-1 over the next 2 weeks with a loss against the Chiefs. And by the way, starting Justin Herbert in this game does not guarantee you a win against the Eagles anyway. So, it could be even worse than that. So, I mean, that's just kind of where I stand here with looking sort of, reading the tea leaves, kind of understanding like common, strategy or whatever. It's like, I just really don't understand. Justin Herbert can say that he wants to play. Like, I think that's, it's different from Aaron Rodgers telling us that he's pushing to play all week. He can say, I intend to start, but like eventually cooler heads or smarter heads have to kind of come in and be like, dude, like we need you for this Chiefs game next week.
Yeah.
It's a bigger deal.
For sure. Crazy stuff there for sure. And if there are places to keep updated as the weekend goes along, where could the good people find you with said information?
Absolutely, man. The Window, Substack, Window Sports Betting, Matt Russell. Really just type any of those things. Window, Sports Betting, Matt Russell. And of course, over at on Twitter at mrussauthentic. Everything that I do gets tweeted out through there. But yeah, just go on Substack, download the Substack app, go to substack.com, type in The Window, Matt Russell. We got college stuff this week, college conference championship week, and then it's bowl season, and of course college football playoff, but bowl season sometimes as lucrative or more so. And then of course obviously the finish to the NFL season, playoffs, and you get into March Madness stuff and Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's just by and large a year-round thing. So yeah, we have a good time over there. Swing through, check it out. If you like it, stay. If you don't, bounce.
Pretty simple stuff. Stuff. Thanks as always, Matt, for checking in on the pod and blessing us with the information we so do crave. Of course, a reminder, you can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. If you're watching any of the content, bless it with the like, bless it with the share, tell your friends, all that other fun stuff. Got a really nice conversation with one of our longtime listeners, Nelson, actually. Nelly was very happy to talk about the pod and enjoyed listening to the pod and following the pod and feeling proud of being one of our OGs. Our OG listeners still riding with us. So big shouts to Nelly for sure. And of course, to everyone else for listening to the pod. My name is Sheldon Alexander. You can find me on Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks betting podcast, as always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.